Welcome to our replay of the webinar for permanent jewelry. Today I'm going to show you a little bit about how to set up the machine and then do some of the different settings. We're also going to talk about some safety, and at the end I'm going to answer a lot of the questions that came up during the seminar when we were doing this live. Make sure you check out the description of the video. That is where I'm going to include links, including discount codes for the PJX, the Permanent Jewelry Expo, coming up in Las Vegas in May 2023. I will also include links to some of my favorite products that I'm showing you here today, and then how I use those as well. So let's take a look now, and at the end I'm going to do a Q&A that happened while this was happening live. For this webinar I'm going to be using the Orion M-Pulse 30 by Sunstone Engineering. Now there are other machines that you can have, and the things that we're going to talk about are going to apply to those machines as well, but we are going to stick with the M-Pulse for this one. Really quickly, let's just talk about what is in the M-Pulse kit. Now I have one upgrade that I've done on this machine, and so that is my upgraded ADL. This is going to give me a larger viewing screen. It's also adjustable, so I can change the direction of it. And if you look here on the back, you'll notice that there's 2 rows of LED lights on either side, and they are pointed in the direction of where our electrode is going to sit, so that we'll have some really good visibility should you choose this particular option. Another thing I like about this one is that I can adjust how high or low this is. So this is a really good option. Now another option that you can upgrade to is a microscope. Now the benefits of having something like this or the microscope that comes from Orion is that it's going to auto darken, and that is going to blank out your screen so that you don't see that spark when it happens. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Now, the machine itself, it's so light and portable. I've got just a little carry case that I can pack everything in and then go from place to place if that's how I choose to work my business with this. So let's talk really quickly about what comes with this machine. Now first you're going to notice this is my stylus, okay, and it has this really big thick tubing on it, and the tubing is so that our argon can flow from the machine down to the stylus, and again we'll talk a little bit more about some of that coming up here. So one of the first things that I have here is I've got the cable that's going to hook from my machine to my screen. This is how my screen knows to auto darken, so the signal is going to come down and say, hey, I'm going to spark, go ahead and blank out my screen. So that's one thing. We have our power box, okay, and you've got the cord that these two hook together, machine, and then hook that into the wall. And I also have the tubing for the argon itself. Now in addition, you're also going to receive 2 what I call alligator clips, okay, and they've got a little different face on these. Now these are the ends of these little alligator clips, and they're kind of nice. They're great for holding some small items, but they can be a little bit tricky and bulky if you're dealing with the chain and small items. So I'm going to go ahead and pack these back up. I'm not going to be using these. I actually prefer a pair of grounded pliers. Now what do I mean by grounded? Well, they have these ends on them that you then plug into the machine, into the back of the machine here, and that's what gives the power and helps to close our circuit when it comes time to welding. So those are all the components that we have for the welder. Let's put this stuff together and get started. So firstly, and it doesn't really matter the order that you put them in, so whatever's closest. So in this case, I'm going to take my argon tubing and I'm just going to insert that into there. The next I have is my auxiliary, and that is going to be this power for my screen. So I'm just going to plug that in and then take this over, and this comes in and plugs into the back of my screen here. The next is the power for our machine. It's going to be there, and now I need to hook the power cable into there, and I'm ready to plug this in. All right, next up I have my stylus. This is going to be where the electrode is put in. Now they've got a nice cover on here, so I'm just going to pull that off, and I'm going to mount this into my machine here. Okay, so I'm going to get this at the right angle So I'm going to put that into here, and there's a little knob underneath that I tighten. So that's going to hold that into place. In order to lock this into place, I have these side knobs. It's going to prevent me from tilting too much, but it's also going to prevent from slipping back and forth. So once I get this into position, then I can lock that into place. Next thing I need to do is to get my Argon set up. Now this is not a very tall tank. I mean, this is only at my knee height, so it's not very big. Like, they definitely come bigger, but they come even one size smaller. When you go with the smaller sizes, you will go through them quicker. If you go with the much smaller size, which I think is like an R size canister, that one, if you're going to do that one, I would say make sure you buy at least 2 or 3 if you're doing shows, so that you can swap them out if you're going to be doing shows or a lot of these. I've got the regulator on here. Now this is a special regulator. Okay, it is meant for argon, but it's not the one that you can just buy at the plumbing supply place or the gas supply place. This is rated for smaller amounts or of pressure for your argon. Like a regular argon welding regulator is going to handle much higher pressures, but we use such little pressure on the welders that you want to get this one. And this is available through Orion or through Sunstone or any of the people who sell the welders. So that I would definitely suggest you also get. They run probably about $160 to $170-ish, in that range a little bit. And then once I've got this on here, it's nice and tight. I made sure that there's no leaks or anything like that. And now all I need to do is just hook it up, and I just do that by pushing it. Okay, so I'm gonna turn on my gas. Now there's 2 different things here that I'm looking at. The first one shows me how much gas I still have in this tank. I'm starting to get low. So it's probably time for me to start thinking about, or putting on my radar, going to exchange this tank or fill it up. The second one is going to tell me how much pressure I have. And here in this case, I want to keep this between probably 6 to 9, and that's about right where I'm at. I'm probably about a 7 psi, or the pressure for this. If you have too much, it's going to not be effective. And if you have too little, it's not going to be effective. So between 6 and 9 is where you want to be on that. I can increase or decrease the pressure by turning this knob here. I'm not going to, since I'm already kind of at that perfect pressure. Now, another thing that your machine is going to come with are some electrodes. These are tungsten. That is where we get that TIG, tungsten inert gas welder. And so you use a tungsten electrode. Now this must remain sharp, and it doesn't stay sharp. So you will also want some kind of a sharpening system. This is one that is the Pilot that's offered by Sunstone, but your machine will also come with a diamond disc that you can insert into a Dremel or a flex shaft or any kind of machine like that. Okay, and what we need to do is insert this into here. But it can't be too long or too short, and you also have to have a way to do it. So what I'm going to do is hold the end of my stylus and the front, and I'm just going to pull the 2 apart. It's going to be pretty snug, so just be aware. And we have in here a collet that is going to accept this electrode. Now, you have to make sure you get this to the right length. So if it sticks out too much, it's not going to work. If it sticks out not enough, it's not going to work. So I use this portion of my handle or my stylus to gauge this. If we look up here, there's going to be kind of this O-ring right here, and that's going to kind of help give us our tension and support inside. And then when you come down, there's this little bit of a groove right here. I want my stylus to sit within that groove. So I'm going to put this up against the end of the collet, and I'm going to push my that electrode in until it sits kind of within this little groove right there. So as long as it sits here within that groove, then it's the right length. And now I can tighten this. This one was really loose. Just double check that measurement right there. I'm spot on. And now I can take and put this back in here. And now you can see my electrode sticks out. Like I said, if it's too far, what happens is the gas cannot come down and shield this. And if it's too short, you can't get to it. So it's kind of important that you get this measurement right. Now this is very sharp, so you want to be very cautious with that because it does hurt when it jabs you. Believe me, you'll do it and you'll find out. And so it's kind of nice that they now include the little cap that you can just insert, and that will help it so that when you travel or whatever else, it's going to protect both you and that electrode. When it comes to sharpening this electrode, this time I'm just going to use this pilot. And what they've done is they've put a cover on here, and you can see, there we go, you can kind of see that little disc sitting in there. And this is where I want to use this line right here to gauge this and get it into the right position. You can see that it's been inserted there. Okay, now there are 3 holes here that are along the side of this. Now what's going to happen as I push this through, it's going to place it onto the disc for me. So what I'm going to do is turn this on, and I'm going to twist. See my fingers twist there? And now my electrode is sharp, and now I can just turn this off. Now my electrode is nice, sharp, and clean, and it's ready to go. The most important things you're going to need is a pair of grounded pliers, and this is going to be if we're doing that permanent jewelry or trying to hold on to other items. Now there's 2 pair that are available. The one that's blue, this is a Orion handle. This comes from both Sunstone and those who are offering some of the welder solutions by Sunstone. Now there's also a really, really nice step-up pair of pliers, and there is quite a cost difference between the two, but there's also a big quality difference between them also. This is a pair of Tronics. I love these pliers. Both of them are made in the United States, which is totally awesome. They're both great quality. This one, the Tronics, has a little finer tip, okay, than what the Orion has. Both of them have a fine tip, but the one for the Tronics is going to be a little finer, and I like this one for my really, really fine chains. Both, like I said, are grounded, so you would plug these into your machine, and that's how you would work these. In addition to a grounded pair, you're still going to need another pair, and I just use regular flat nose pliers. They're not grounded, it's just a regular pair of pliers, but you're going to need these to be able to close jump rings or connections, so you want to have 2 pairs of pliers, one that's grounded and one that is not. So my pliers just plug in here in this top port on the back. Final thing is to make sure everything is all plugged in, and you heard that start up, and now we're ready to jump in. Changing the settings on the M poles is very straightforward and pretty easy. If I want to increase my wattage, all I need to do is press the plus sign, or I can click on the slider and drag it around. When I'm ready to do a weld, I need to push the power button, and now it has the energy and power going to my stylus. You also have the option to lock your settings. So let's say we've got it where we want it to be. We don't want it to accidentally be bumped or have somebody come and push anything. So all you have to do is select that lock button, and it now is locked. When you have the welding system, you've got the screen, you have your unit, and right now, if I touch this electrode, nothing is going to happen because I have not completed the circuit. So at some point, you have to complete the circuit. Right now, this electrode and stylus are hooked up to the machine, but I need a way to get this power to be completed, and that's where these grounded pair of pliers comes into play. And now when I touch the electrode, you can hear the system will actually activate. And I don't know if the audio picks this up or not, but you can actually hear the hiss of the gas coming out. Now you also hear the beep. That bop at the very end tells me that it was not a good weld. It wasn't anything that was completed. But if I take something here and I touch it, and you heard that pop now, and now the machine knows that it went ahead and fired off an actual weld. So how does this all work? So right now we have a circuit that is a partial circuit, just the machine. You need the grounded pliers to complete that circuit. When I touch the electrode, you can hear it's pulling in the gas, it's also sending that energy. So what happens is that energy comes in, it comes down the electrode. The electrode is going to retract. So let's say I've got this ring. The electrode is actually going to retract a bit. That gas is going to come and shield the area. That energy, that plasma comes down, and because the electrode has retracted and there's now a gap, we're going to have an arc of energy, hence the name pulse arc welding. All right, so that arc comes down, hits my metal, makes this a molten pool of metal. And that gas is there to help keep that metal nice and clean while that pool is molten. And then it's going to solidify, and then this electrode is going to come back down and be touching my piece. If my energy is too high, there's going to be a number of different things that happen. Either I'm going to get a flat spot or I will blow out. In this case, you can see I now have a flat spot on that ring. Another very common problem is if the ring is not completely closed. So hopefully you can see here that ring is just barely open. And if I come in here to weld this, what's going to happen is I'm going to end up with a ball on one side and then maybe even a ball on both sides. But if you don't have a good connection, you're not going to get a good weld. And what happens if my energy is too low? So on this one, I actually hit it twice. And this time I really didn't get anything. My ring is still open. I just have a little bit of extra soot on there that has to be cleaned off. So you can hit this a couple of times if you don't have quite enough energy. But really the goal is to find the right setting for the ring that you're doing. So you only have to hit it one time, and it gives you a nice solid join without giving you a flat spot, without blowing it open. As I weld, you'll notice that my electrode is getting kind of some dark spots on here. And also sometimes it will just be coated with whatever materials it is that you're welding. Now on the information page for this webinar, it says that I'm going to tell you 3 things about your electrode. Number 1, it must be sharp. You have to keep this sharp. Number 2, not too long, right? We talked about how to put this in properly. Number 3, if this is not clean, you are not going to get a good weld. It will start to send that energy in all the different directions because it cannot come straight down your electrode. So keep it sharp, keep it clean, and not too long. Now let's talk a little bit about argon, because people are always asking about the argon. They say, well, it's just a tiny little weld. Do I really need that argon? Yes. It makes a huge difference, regardless of what people say, that even though they've been doing it without, it is going to make a difference. Those without the argon are going to have a higher rate of failure on their connections than those who use argon. Why? What does argon do? First of all, argon is an inert gas, which means it's not flammable. It's not going to explode the way propane or acetylene would, or even butane. So it's a lot safer to use as far as this goes. It's inert, like I said. So what's going to happen is that gas is going to come down and shield that weld. When you have that pulse arc that happens, it's a plasma arc. That's really hot. Plasma, think of the sun. Really, really hot. And that is going to come in, and you're going to melt your metal right there at that arc. Okay? When you have metal that is melted, it is going to oxidize. And what the gas is going to do is keep the oxidation away from that metal while it's still molten, because that's when it is at its most fragile. Without the argon, that metal is going to oxidize as it is a molten pool, and then it's going to solidify. But now that oxidation is inside of that weld. That means we have these little teeny tiny bubbles which make our weld porous. If your weld is porous, it's going to break. Okay, and it might not do it immediately, but eventually it's going to. With the argon, we're going to have a much smoother weld that just kind of brings everything together. It allows it to join, and it's also going to make it so that it does it a little bit smoother so you have a better surface. That is going to create a stronger joint. That's not to say that that weld is not going to break, because it certainly can. Okay, and part of that comes back down to your welder settings. Did you get it too high? Did you get it too low? Did we get it enough? Did we make certain that that weld went all the way through? When you're working with permanent jewelry, typically we're working with very, very tiny rings, and it's hard to not get that weld all the way through. Still possible, but we want to make sure that it goes all the way through that ring or that join that we are creating. Because again, if we had to do multiple welds to close a ring, we might still have an air gap here in the middle, and that becomes a weak spot. Another thing with the argon is that it's going to keep that oxidation at bay, like I said, but that means that when I get done with this weld, regardless if I have argon or not, there's going to be a little black spot right there at that weld spot. Now, without argon, that black spot is in your piece, okay? It's part of that weld. It is the oxidation. With argon, however, that little black spot sits on the surface. Okay, it's not inside of your weld. It's just right there on top. And that's where we see that I use that little glass or fiberglass brush, and I just brush it away because it's on the surface. Now in jewelry making, we use a product called flux whenever we're soldering something together. Soldering is the process of us using an alloy or a metal that's going to melt faster than the other metals that we're putting together or joining together. We use this flux again to help keep that weld clean and the oxidation at bay, or keep it away. Okay, argon is like your flux. It is an important part of this process. Even though people say that they do it all the time without, yeah, you can do it without. However, you've just got to remember, your welds are not going to be as clean, they're not going to be as strong, and they will tend to be a little bit more porous. Let's talk about eye protection. Protecting your eyes is going to be of utmost importance, and it terrifies me of what I've heard in some of the training that is happening out there. Now, first and foremost, this is what's called a micro-TIG welder, tungsten inert gas. It is the same process that people use when they're welding buildings, when they're welding ships, when they're welding furniture, when they're welding any of that stuff. Have you ever noticed a welder has a helmet with a dark screen over their eyes? That is a very, very, very important thing. You have one set of eyeballs. That's it. That's all you ever get, and you darned well better take good care of them. The welding that happens on this, that little spark, even though it's tiny, even though it doesn't look like much of anything, will burn your retinas. Make no mistake, it will burn your retinas. It is so important that you use eye protection. Now, you have a couple of options for that. One, you have the auto darkening lens that's happening on the screen itself. You see that when that spark happens, the screen goes dark. That is protecting your eyes. You have that same type of thing in the microscope if you chose to have that option. But let's say you want to protect your customers, or you don't want to use the auto darkening lens. Maybe you're working under a magnifying glass, which is even worse if you don't have protection. So let's say that you don't want to use one of the auto darkening systems. Get yourself and your clients a pair of shades. Now this is a shade number 5 welding glasses. Okay, now shade number 5. Don't do shade number 3. Don't do shade number 2. You've got to have at least a 5 or higher. Okay, this is what's going to protect your eyes as well. Now when you have them on, it is dark. It is hard to see around and different things like that. But I'd rather have it be dark and be prepared and protect my eyes and my customer eyes. These run about $10 to $20. They're very inexpensive, and they will save your eyes and your customer's eyes. Now, another option that you have if you don't want to do the whole glasses thing, have them look through a cell phone, or you can look through your cell phone for that matter. There's a couple benefits that come with that. If somebody's looking through their cell phone, they can record it, right? And then they can take that, post it on their social media and say, hey, look what I just had done. Go visit so-and-so, and you can get one too. That's going to be benefit number one. Number two is you get to zoom in. You can actually really see very close up in high detail. And that little spark that happens, as long as you're looking through the screen of your cell phone, is not going to damage your eyes. Now let's discuss skin protection. You are welding a chain, which is a piece of metal, onto a person's arm, their ankle, their neck. So you want to make sure that they are protected. In most cases, we are working with such a small voltage that you're really not going to have sparks. But for the ease of everybody's mind and also liability issues, it is important that you do some kind of protection. Now you can put a thin piece of leather in between the chain and their skin at wherever point you are welding. Now I know that some of the unbranded welders can have a little different voltage that shoots through that ring, and it isn't always consistent, okay? And not just the ring, but the bracelet. And I've actually seen customers who have walked away with burns from that inconsistency of the welds. So it's something that you need to really be prepared for, especially if you're not going to spend the money to buy a quality machine. You can cut corners. There are less expensive machines, but there's a reason that they are not as expensive, and there are reasons that they're as affordable as they are. If that's the case and you have one of those machines, I would highly recommend that the entire arm be protected. Now that poses a problem because it could make your chain a little bit too thick. So I was talking about having a little piece of leather. Well, some of the different permanent jewelry kits that you can buy are going to have a piece of leather in there, but it's really thick. This one is really thin. Okay, this is one that I picked up from Micro Tools. It's actually meant to go on the body of a camera. So they have a bunch of camera repair type of stuff, but this is what that is. And this will allow me to cut a small section, and then I can slip it in underneath the person's bracelet when I go to weld that. This is going to protect their skin, but it's also not going to add a lot of bulk to that bracelet. It's just something that you need to really be aware of. So another part of safety on this is we are permanently attaching a piece of jewelry. Now we say permanently, but is it really? No, it's not. It can always be cut off, but you really do need to give some good thought as to what you are welding onto somebody. If you're welding a chain on somebody's neck, that's always something you want to really be leery of. At that point, you really need to be choosy with what chains you are doing on this. Same thing on a bracelet or an anklet. If the piece of jewelry were to snag on something, always keep this in mind. Something has to break. It has to. What is going to break? Okay, is it the chain? Is it the wrist? Is it the ankle? Is it the neck? You want to think about this. I need it to break. So that is safety item number one. Two, are you creating a stack? Stacks are also very dangerous because a stack equals more force that is needed to break that chain or those chains. So again, I would kind of steer people away from doing a stack. They look fun, they're great, and people like to have multiple bracelets, but it really is a safety issue. As for these reasons, we tell people to select more fine or dainty chains. So let's take a look at some of the different chains and what would make something appropriate versus not appropriate for a permanent jewelry. So I actually have three sections here. This lower section, and you can actually see just by looking at the variety that I have here, kind of which ones would be best and which aren't. At least I hope so. So let's talk about this. These bottom four chains, absolutely, those work really well as permanent jewelry. The next three are kind of maybes. And then the top three, absolutely not. And you'll notice that I have one here that's even really small links. It's not just the size of the links that is determining the suitability for making permanent jewelry, because I have some here that are a little larger link, but maybe the wire's a bit thinner. You know, some of these look like they would really be appropriate. Absolutely, these bottom four are 100% appropriate. And what I'm looking at is the size of material that makes up each link. In jewelry, we measure this by millimeters, and I use a digital caliper to see how big or how thick some of these are. So if we take a look here at the first chain, and what I do is I just come in and I measure just that one length. And right here, it's a 0.37. That is going to be pretty decent, I think. I want to stay, if possible, under 0.5 millimeters, half a millimeter. That's pretty small. Okay, anything over half a millimeter, if depending on the chain style, we may run into problems with the chain not breaking. So both of these are like 0.32. This little heart one here, 0.37. And then this gold chain or gold filled chain is 0.25. So these are going to work really well. As a matter of fact, this gold filled chain right here, this was on me. It broke. Okay, and quite honestly, I'm not totally sure how it broke, but it did. And that is, again, something that I would rather have happen than not. Then if we get into these other chains, so these are kind of maybes. So when I come in here and I measure these, I'm going to measure the little link that's holding the bars together. Okay, and I'm at a 0.56. The bar itself is a 1 millimeter bar. However, the link that, or the little part of the bar that the link goes into is much thinner, but it still has some good strength. So it's a 0.39. So that one's kind of why this falls into the maybe category. But I will tell you, that's one that I currently wear even on myself. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit about why I'm comfortable with this one on me in just a moment. All right, so continuing on, we look at the next chain and it's 0.49. So it's half a millimeter. This one falls into my maybe, but just barely. Okay, and again, it's a little riskier, but it would probably still work okay. This chain, I kind of bordered, it's 0.53, 0.52. I was having a hard time deciding whether or not I should put this in my no way pile, but it's kind of in the maybe pile. I feel like this particular chain is still a little bit too thick to be comfortable. So really I ought to probably move it up here to the no way. Now this one, okay, this chain has some really, really small links. It's not large at all. So why does this one not count? Why does that fall into my no way category? Well, when I come in here and I take this measurement, this is 0.7 millimeters. All right, so that one, you're gonna have a really hard time breaking this one if it gets caught. And I'm telling you guys, that's exactly how I go through these chains. I'm like, is this going to break? I mean, look at these. These guys are really thick. So here we're talking actually a whole millimeter. So 1 millimeter on each of these chains. There's no way that baby is breaking easily if it gets caught. So there would be some harm done, bodily harm done, if these 3 chains get caught. Possibly this guy. Okay, but definitely on these 3. And so that's how I look at the chains and kind of decide what I'm going to do. When it comes to connecting your chains together, we have a couple of options. If I have a chain link that's a little bit larger, like some of these are, I can just use one of the links as the link itself. So I would just cut it open up that ring like I showed you before, put the bracelet on, close that ring, and then I would weld that ring closed. Sometimes though, I might need a different ring. Maybe I need a different size or a different shape. And so then I can look at buying some that are maybe already made. So these have come from Halstead Jewelry Supply, and they've got a whole variety. But you can look at places like Stoller and Rio, and they are also going to have some. And then finally, you can just make your own. Your own jump ring can be just as simple as taking a pair of pliers and some wire and just turning a loop, and now I have a small ring that I can cut and now use that as a connecting piece. My goal here would be to select a wire that is the same size as the material that was used to make the chain. The other thing you have to consider is the material of your chain that you're using. If I have sterling silver, I want to find a sterling silver wire. If I have gold fill, then I either want to use gold or I want to find another gold fill wire that again is that similar size. Now this also brings us to which materials are appropriate for this. Now this is a copper chain. Definitely not appropriate because this is such a big chain. So this would not be one that I would do as permanent jewelry, but I might also be a little bit cautious in offering a copper chain. The reason for that is because a lot of people are going to react to copper. The majority of people will. I know for me, if I get a little bit wet, whether it's perspiration, washing my hands, rain, whatever, I become the Jolly Green Giant or I'm a blue Smurf. So you'll want to be very aware of the skin reactions that happen with copper. Nickel and steel are another issue because again, people are going to react to those materials as they oxidize, and then some people just have allergies to nickel. I know I do. When it comes to 14 karat gold fill, it is not a solid piece of wire. There is something in there as a core. And you don't always know what that core is. A lot of times it's brass, but sometimes it's just a mystery metal. So you want to be very cautious about using gold fill. It's great because it gives us that gold look without the price of gold. Sterling silver, some people are still going to react. As a matter of fact, some people wear sterling silver and they can turn it black just like that. I know that my daughter is one of those. She will eat right through a sterling silver bracelet. And there's nothing wrong with the chain or the material itself. It's just their body chemistry. Now, another thing you need to note when you're putting bracelets on somebody is what that is going to look like, where it's going to sit. Some people are going to want a bracelet that's a little bit more loose, has a bit more movement to it. So you can see this gold bracelet on me, I can move around quite a bit because there is a lot of excess in here for me to do that. Whereas this silver bracelet, this actually does not move much at all. It just sits right here because it is tight enough to do that. Now that poses a couple of different things. Okay, I made sure that I could move my wrist quite freely without it grabbing, without it tugging or anything like that. And it's also going to protect me from getting caught because it is so tight fitting, not even tight fitting, but so close fitting to my skin. Like you should still be able to stick a finger under here. Okay, so I do have at least that ability. If you can't stick at least a finger in there, it's going to be too tight. But here I can stick several fingers and it still, you know, has a bit of room. This one is definitely more prone to catching on something. And especially if I have a stack of these, that's where we could run into an issue. Another thing that you have to note is that some chains are naturally going to stretch. Just the design of them is going to stretch. So you've seen some of the chains that are kind of an open and then they have a little one and then they have a bigger one and then a little one, bigger, little, that type of thing. Well, those bigger rings, especially if it's more of a ring rather than an oval or a kind of a diamond shape, those are going to stretch. Okay, just by wearing it. So if I had a bracelet like that fit like this silver one right here, and if I just bend my wrist, right there is a little bit of a tug. If I had one of those bracelets that was slightly with an open design, it's going to stretch. Okay, and that's just going to be something that you need to kind of warn your customers about, and then maybe consider doing an adjustment. So let's say that they've worn it for a week or even a couple of days and it has stretched. Tell them, hey, come back in, we'll shorten it and re-weld that for you free of charge, or maybe $5 or whatever you want to set up. But just be aware, some designs are naturally going to stretch. What if your customer comes to you and they say, I want this nice thick Rolo chain or cable chain or any other kind of chain? Okay, it's a little bigger, it's a little thicker. Absolutely, I would not weld it onto them, even with a liability form. I might, however, give them a couple of different options. One of which is I will go ahead and put that chain on them, and I will close the jump ring, but I will not weld it closed. That gives me a breakaway point. Again, something has to break, and I want the chain to break, not anything else. And a thick chain is not going to break. So you can close the ring and not weld it, or you can give them the option of just putting a traditional clasp on that chain. That also gives you an option to sell to people who don't want a permanent piece of jewelry, but they want to participate in the trend. Go ahead and get some small clasps and allow them to still put that on there, and you now have even more customers. Now here's a quick lesson for those that are new to jewelry. When we have a jump ring, or this is the connector, you want to make sure that you open and close these so that you retain the same shape that you started with. In this case, my ring is round and I want it to retain that shape. So when you open a ring, you never pull. If you were to pull this open, you change the shape of that ring, and you will never get that back to round. You just won't. Because even if I try to push this back closed again, it alters the shape of that ring. And now I have something that's a little bit more of an oval. Doesn't show up too well here on the screen, but it definitely does in person. It's no longer round. So the proper way to do this is you're going to hold one side. Oh, and another thing too, your pliers should always be flat on the inside. Never have any teeth. Okay, if you have teeth, that's going to transfer to your metal. So I'm going to hold my piece just like this, and both of these have a flat jaw on the inside, even though they're a little rounded on the top. And what's going to happen is I'm going to push these together as I twist. So what happens is we kind of go like this. Okay, so here I just kind of overlapped it, but we take that ring and we're going to kind of push it together like this, and I do overlap, and then I pull it off and I overlap it again. And what's gonna happen is when I let go, it's gonna kind of open up a little bit, and then it'll hold itself together because I did what's called a little bit of spring back. That metal naturally wants to kind of open back up. So by taking that ring and closing it like this and going over and over again, when I come and let go, then it will come back and touch there. And now I have a ring that is still round and totally closed. It is important that the ring touch. Okay, that joint has to be touching. If there's even a little bit of an opening, it can't actually complete the weld. They have to be touching. Another thing I'm going to need are a pair of cutters. Now this is where you're going to have something a little bit more expensive. One thing you need to know about pretty much all cutters, and you can kind of see there's a similar reoccurring theme on these. On the back side, it's nice and flat and flush, but on the inside where that cutter comes together, it's pinched, and it's going to create a pinch when you do this cutting. That means that one side of my ring is going to be flat while the other one has a pinch on it, and they're going to try to join like this. I need to get rid of this pinch so that I've got two flat ends that come together when I close that ring. So here I have a ring, and let's say I'm going to go ahead and cut that ring. So now, and it's going to be almost impossible to show you on the screen, but one side is flat and one side is pinched. Some people will take the cutter, so we cut it this way, and that means now the pinched edge is over here, and they would take that cutter, turn it around, and cut one more time. And now they have two flat ends. That's fantastic and that's great. But now, when I go to close this ring, it's no longer going to be round because I have removed a section of that wire. In this case, the ring is small. You're not going to really notice that. But it's something to be aware of if that's the method you choose to do. Now, one cutter that was just recently introduced to me, and I love it, it's by Sunstone. These are from Rio Grande, and it is a shear, not just a cutter. And so you are going to have a little bit better cut where it gives us more of a flush cut on both sides of that ring. So that's an option to look at as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and include the links to these over in the chat box, or if you're watching the replay on my YouTube channel, these will be down in the description of my video. Let's talk a little bit about how we find the right settings in our welder with a particular chain or a ring or something like that. When I very first got my M-Pulse, I made a whole bunch of jump rings, all the same size, but different gauges or different thicknesses of wire. And what I did was, so in M-Pulse, you have 27 settings. You have from 3 to 30. And so I wrote in here from 3. Well, in this case, I stopped at 27 because I didn't need to go further. But anyway, 3 to 30 on some of these. And then what I did was I took and I set the welder at that particular setting, and I tried it, and then I laid that ring down. So here now I have a whole notebook. It's kind of hard to see on here just because of the glare, because what I've done is I've taped it all in. Okay, so after it's here, now it's basically laminated in there, you can see that. And now I can go in and look at each of these different welds to see what it truly looks like. So if you look here at some of these on this end, the 27, 26, 25, you can see that they've blown out, right? There's a ball on each end there. And then if we look just up here a little bit more, 8, 9, and 10, they're beautiful. They're absolutely perfect. And so you'll notice that I've underlined those. And that tells me that that is the proper setting for a 6.2 millimeter outer diameter ring. And it is 0.6 millimeters, which is 22 gauge. So that tells me the thickness of that ring. So once I have all of that done, I can then create basically like a little cheat sheet. So I have the thickness of my wire, and in both gauges and in millimeters. And then I also have the watt range that works the best for that. And then I've marked which ones are probably the ideal setting to start with. So I can start with that, and then I can make changes from there, whether I need to go up or down. Now, doing this notebook is going to do a number of things for you. First of all, you're going to find your settings. Second of all, you are going to really get good at holding that ring in the proper place to get a proper weld. You are going to see what it is that you need to do to a ring to make it closed. You're going to tell right away whether or not a weld was good or whether it wasn't. And it'll help you to not have to second guess whether a join is a good one or if it's going to fail very quickly. So the very first thing I would suggest you do is you take a section of each of the chains that you are offering to your clients and customers and do a little test weld section. Okay, by doing this with the jump rings that I did, I would find wire or jump rings in the same thickness as my chains. And I would do that with my jump rings first. And then I would find that range that is perfect for doing that particular size or thickness. And then I would weld onto my chain and get that range so that I mark it nicely. Then I would come in and I would tape my segment of chain, write the name of that particular chain style and the materials, and I would write my welding settings. And from there, you just create your little cheat sheet. So then you can stick that in with whether you tape it onto your welder, whether you make a little card and you just take it with you so it can sit there, whatever the case might be. You might even label, you know, where you've got your chains on display. So whether you have a tag on it or you might have them wrapped on a spool, you can look on the spool. Somewhere you're going to want to get that chain setting. This is going to do a couple of different things for you. One, you're going to look far more competent when you go to pick up a chain and you dial in the right unit of energy or whatever else the case might be. And it's going to make them so that they trust you because you are going to have the confidence to just get right in there, weld that. You're going to weld it one time and you're going to be ready to go. For whatever reason, there are days that your welds are just not going to go like they have before, and you might find yourself finding new settings. And that could be any number of changes. The atmosphere, the humidity, maybe there's more dryness. It doesn't matter. Like different elevations can even change it. Not really supposed to, but for whatever reason, things like that happen. So if you've got your settings that work every time and all of the sudden they don't, you probably need to work just right above or below the range where you're used to working, and you'll be able to get back on track again. But then keep in mind, when you go to the next facility or the next day or whatever, it might go right back to where you were to begin with. When it comes to closing jump rings, one of the things that I will often do is use some filler wire. And what that's going to do is give me a little stronger weld because I'm actually adding material and metal into that join. So that join, you've already created a weak spot. Even if we do weld it, depending on how you're doing this, especially if you're not using argon, you're still going to have a very weak weld. So what you can do is you can get some what's called filler wire or laser wire. And this is basically just still the same material, but it's like 30 gauge. And there are some that are alloyed to be a little bit different. So for my sterling silver wire, I'm going to use either a sterling silver laser wire, or I actually have a really cool material that I really like. Now in this case, I've loaded these into what are called speed wire containers. And this allows me just to roll this out, and you can see that I'm actually increasing or decreasing how much wire is out here. One of my favorite welding wires is made by a jeweler named Jeff Herman. He's a restoration specialist. He works on all kinds of antiques and whatever else, but he uses pulse arc welding for a lot of that. And what he found was, as he was welding with just regular sterling wire, he would notice that there would be cracks that would develop within that weld. Well, he has come up with an alloy himself that includes 5% platinum. And that platinum makes all the difference. And so you'll notice if you use this, especially on larger items, that you will not have that cracking. So that's something to look at. These are available at his website, which is silverweldingwire.com. Now, you can also just order sterling silver laser wire. This is still just sterling silver. It just happens to be 30 gauge, which is really, really tiny. Think about like a human hair. So you're kind of getting into that thickness right there. But that is also available to you. And then that sterling would be the exact same material as what's in your chain. Now, when it comes to gold fill and gold, I like to do something a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit more expensive because it is actually gold, but when you're using this, you're not even using 5 cents worth of gold if you were to weld this into place. Like you might use maybe 2 cents worth. So this little bit of wire in here cost me $130, but to tell you the honest truth, I may not ever need to refill this if all I was ever doing is permanent jewelry. Now in this case, this is 14 karat yellow. Why do I want 14 karat yellow? Now I've actually changed that. So if I'm doing a gold fill bracelet, I'm now going to do this with 18 karat gold. The reason for that is when we have something that is gold fill, the only layer that's gold is the top. The inside, we're not totally sure what that is. It could be brass, it could be silver, it could be any number of mystery metals. And when you go to weld this, you're making a molten pool of whatever that is. And that is going to lower your carat of gold. Now, I used to do it with 14 karat gold until one of my friends at Rio, his name is Phil, told me what he does is he uses 18 karat gold on a gold fill bracelet. Now, why do we do that? Because like, let's say I take this 14 karat gold and I put it into the gold fill bracelet. Again, we've added it to that little molten metal mess of whatever is there. Well, it's going to drop the carat of my gold that I'm adding in, and we're still going to have a little color difference. Whereas if we add in 18 karat gold, then it's going to give us a little stronger bond, and it's also going to give us a better color match. And then we're going to really truly be a little bit more close to 14 karat there at that join wherever it is that we've added that. So when I do gold fill, I now do 18 karat. If I have a 14 karat bracelet, then I'm still going to use my 14 karat laser wire. When it comes to adding filler wire,
If I want to just do that on every one of these, what I'm going to do is bring my ring up to my welder, not quite touching it. I'm going to bring my wire and set it down on the seam itself. And then I'm going to bring the electrode just to the tip of that wire and let it bring in the end of the wire and apply it to my ring. Now in this case, it left me a little bit of a bump right here, and all I need to do is just touch it one more time, and it will smooth that out beautifully. And that helps me to have a little stronger weld because I've added that metal to it as well.
And now look at my electrode. This is starting to get a little bit of a white tip on that. Anytime I see that, especially if I am doing permanent jewelry, I'm going to remove that electrode, sharpen it, and clean that up, just like so. And if I need to, I can also take this fiberglass brush and just kind of brush off some of the soot. Again, the energy cannot flow efficiently down that electrode if it is dirty. When it comes time to testing the weld or finding the right settings for my chain, I'm going to take a link of that chain. In this case, you can see I'm still connected here. And I'm going to swing this link closed. And again, I want to make certain I have a nice good fit or a good join on this particular link. I want to make sure everything is touching. Now I like to brace myself, so I have one hand sitting here on my countertop and then another just up here next to my welder. It's going to be obviously a little bit different when you have a chain on somebody that you're putting this onto. Now to get the best weld, I want to hold my pliers away from the top of my join. Okay, and that way my pliers don't pull any of the energy. Now here you can see this particular setting was too strong. Notice that we've got that big flat spot on here. Now because that one did not work, I'm going to try it again. So once more, I've cut another link. I've changed my settings. So before that was 8 watts, and now I'm going to do one at only 5 watts. Again, I want to hold my link down at the bottom as far away from my joint as possible. This is 5 watts, and again, I have a flat spot. So that tells me I need to go down even further. So this time I'm at 3 watts. And my links are open just a little bit, so I did not have as good of a connection as I probably should have done. So I'm going to clean this link up with my fiberglass brush. Just get rid of some of that soot that's sitting there on that surface. I'm going to make certain that these 2 ends are touching, and we're going to try it one more time. There we go. And that is a much better joint. Now I still have a flat spot, but that was just because that ring had kind of come open a little bit. In this case, it's such a small ring that I'm not too worried about it, but I'm going to use my pliers here just to kind of reshape that just a little bit. And now this is actually a fairly decent joint, and I would be okay with that. When I use filler wire, it sometimes can get a little tricky if you're not super steady. So what I like to do is brace my hands both on the machine as well as on the tabletop. And what I like to do is just bring this filler wire in right here at the join, and then I'm going to touch right there at that join with my welder. And it will attach that wire. You may have to hit it a couple of times to release this filler wire. There we go. And now that filler wire becomes part of this join. Now I have here a little extra, so what I'm going to do is just kind of bring it in and touch this. There we go.
and it's going to blend that wire in. If you select the right color, that filler wire is not only going to match beautifully, but it's also going to give you a much stronger weld. If you ever have a weld that's not closing, check your electrode. If your electrode is dirty, it is not going to work. But notice what happens when I clean the electrode and come back in and try that weld one more time.
All right, so that was a lot of material to cover. Let's tackle some of the Q&A that happened in the chat while this video was playing. First of all, does it matter if it's sterling, silver, or gold filled in choosing the level of your machine? Yes, it is going to play a little bit of a difference just because the materials that you are welding together are going to react differently to that weld itself. So you will have to play, and that's kind of where I showed you in my notebook where I've created that chart of all the different jump rings. That's where I learn where those settings fall. I also learn very quickly how that metal moves and melds together and what happens if it doesn't or has too much energy. Next one, how do you power the welder at outdoor markets without electricity? Well, obviously we're going to have some power. So some people say that they get a generator. One's called Jackery. Another thing that I use is a battery pack from Blue Eddy. They're a little bit heavier, but they're great. All right, regarding that laser wire or the fill wire, can we say what this is for again? Yes, I use the filler wire to help me create a much stronger join. If I have my wire and I've got a blunt end and I have a pointed end, when I go to create this, the way that the weld works is it's going to pull metal from both areas. Now, obviously we have a lot of metal on this one and not so much here. So that filler wire allows me to give it more wire or more material to pull in and create that stronger weld and join. It's going to give me more material, like I said, which does make it stronger. It's also going to help me fill that, hence the name filler wire. All right, where can you buy the laser wire or the speed wire holders? These I got at Stoller. Now Stoller also offers a whole range of filler wire. It's essentially 30 gauge, all right, but it comes in everything: platinum, 14 karat, 10 karat, 9 karat, sterling, sterilium. It just has a lot of different options. You can also get that laser wire from Rio Grande, and I'll include links to both of those down in the description. Where can we find that platinum sterling? So remember, I talked about the filler wire that I use that is sterling silver but has 5% platinum, and that one is what I now use for all of my sterling fills, and that is going to be at silverweldingwire.com. The maker of that is an artist named Jeff Herman. Do I always use filler wire? No, I don't always use filler wire, but I'm going to use it quite a bit of the time if I have a small ring that I'm working with and I want to make sure that that joint is nice and secure. But if I have a ring that's a little thicker, I can go ahead and pull that wire in from both sides of that joint and really fill that in nicely with the material that's available right there. Can you use 30 gauge filler wire on a jump ring that's like 18 gauge or thicker? Yes, absolutely you can. So even though I'm adding something that's only 30 gauge, what I'm doing is just adding that extra material into that joint. It doesn't matter that it's so much thinner than what I'm working with. Matter of fact, that's what filler wire is, just a really thin wire that you use then to add to the material that you're welding together. So it's totally fine. The next question is related to that. Can I use something that's 28 gauge rather than 30? Absolutely. Matter of fact, before I started using 28 and 30 gauge, I was using even 24 gauge. Now, next question is, can you get Argentium filler wire? Again, filler wire is essentially just 30 gauge wire or a very fine gauge wire. So it doesn't even have to be 30. It could be 28, it could be 26, 24. It's just a finer gauge of wire. So if you're working with Argentium, then I would just find a thinner gauge or that really tiny gauge, that fine gauge, and use that for the filler wire. When it comes to the welding, do you weld first and then fill? Well, it just kind of depends. Sometimes I will do an initial weld and I can look and see what the health of that weld looks like. Is it too thin? Is it kind of stringy? Did I not get a good connection? And then I can determine whether or not I need to add a fill to it. Sometimes I just already know that I'm just going to come in and use the filler wire. Again, creating that chart is really going to help you figure out all of the answers to those questions, and there's just no shortcut for trial and error. Do you need a speed wire holder, or can I just hold the coil in my hand? You can totally hold the coil in your hand, absolutely. But I will tell you, when I'm working on something really fine like the permanent jewelry, it's much easier to hold something that's in a shape like this versus holding that little coil and trying to hold the ring and the pliers. So for me this works, but no, it is definitely not necessary. All right, when it comes to welding, if you hit that ring or area with multiple welds, doesn't that oxidize it more? Yes, it absolutely does. And again, if we're using that argon, it's still going to help to keep the area clean so that all I have to do is brush that off. If I'm not getting a good join, I need to look at a couple things. What is the health of your electrode? Do you have little pieces of metal stuck to your electrode? Those need to be cleaned off. That's also going to contribute a lot to the soot that you have there. So clean your electrode, make sure that you clean off your area, and then come and hit it again. Hopefully you don't have to hit the weld area too many times, but a lot of times, especially as I work with larger pieces, not just permanent jewelry, but as I work with larger pieces, I can end up with a lot of soot, and you'll periodically see me cleaning it up and then going back in for another round. All right, so you saw at the very end that when I was doing the weld on that jump ring, it wasn't very big, and my power was really low, and there was not a spark. There is not always a spark. Now, typically when you run in lower wattages, like if I'm down at 3 or something, I won't see a spark. Now, that's not to say that a spark won't happen, because it most certainly can. And I think I've also noticed, and I cannot say that it's 100% of the time, but sometimes my materials make different sparks. Okay, but it's still very important that you're wearing those glasses, but it does not always spark. So don't think that if it didn't spark, it didn't give you a good join, because it very easily could have. It just didn't spark. All right, sometimes the fiberglass brush gets a little bit dirty. How can you clean that off? I never really worry about it, but if I really want to clean it off, I will find a surface like my tabletop or a bench block or even a knife, and just kind of rub it on it and kind of trim down those fiberglass fibers. Now, you have to be very careful of these because they are very, very small. And these suckers do get embedded into you. And let me tell you, having a fiberglass sliver stinks. Okay, I love that I have microscopes, because without them, they're hard to see and hard to find. And then related to the fiberglass brush, can you use this to clean your electrode? Sort of. You can use this to wipe off the soot from your electrode. However, it is not going to clean your electrode. So if you get some of that metal splattered up onto your electrode, the only way to get that off is to use that diamond disc and grind it off. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the argon. Now, I mentioned that I have a smaller tank. So this is my smaller tank. I don't know if you guys can actually see my bigger tank under here at the bench, but this is a smaller one. This is the one that I believe is like an R size. It could be a K, but I don't think so. I think it's an R. And if you're going to go with something small like this, they're great because they're tiny, they're portable. And you also saw in the video that I said that my argon tank is getting empty. So I like having this little one as a backup, because now I have something that I can, if I run out of my big tank, I can just swap over to the little one, go fill my big tank, or actually swap it, and then I can come back and hook that back up. But you're also going to go through that little one much faster depending on how busy you are. So if you're going to go with that little one, I would suggest you buy 2 or 3 of them, just so that you have some that you can rotate out, especially if you're at a busy show. The last thing you want to do is run out and not be able to finish. Where can you purchase that smaller tank? In this case, for me, I had to go to my welding supply place. That's also where I pick up my argon and my propane for all of the gases that I use in my studio. How many welds does a tank last? Now there is a $1 million question, and there's no good answer for that, because sometimes you're going to trigger that little weld and it's not going to weld, and each time we go to trigger a weld, it's bringing in that argon to shield the area that we're trying to weld. So if you're doing it and still getting misfires every time, you're still using up your argon, but you know, you're not really getting that weld. Or you might be hitting a perfect weld every time, but if I do 100 bracelets or 100 pieces or 200 pieces in a show or whatever, then I'm going to go through that a lot quicker. So there's really, unfortunately, no good way to give you a really good answer on that. All right, so then there was another question that said, are all machines the same? And if they are, why can't there just be a cheat sheet for all chain? Example, the energy output and the argon setting. When it comes to setting my argon, I pretty much leave mine set at about 7 to 9 psi. 7 to 8, 9 psi is where I typically run mine. And I don't typically have to change that. Now, like I said in the video, there can be atmospheric differences that are going to affect your welds and your pressure that day. You just have to kind of watch your machine. Now, as far as giving you a generalized cheat sheet, we can't, because you might get your chain, even though it looks exactly the same as mine, you might get that from a different maker and supplier, and that could have some variations in there. Also, again, like our materials might be different. So there is no real good way to do that. Again, the best way to do that is you're gonna have to play with your machine, spend some time with it, doing trial and error. Make sure that you just build in, when you buy your chain, you build in a little section that you can test on. If you don't want to start testing on your chain itself, get some wire in the same thickness as the material of your chain, so that then you can go in and do those test welds first, and then pull in a section of chain to verify that you have the right settings. All right, another question is, I may have missed this, but what's the troubleshooting for when the welder makes a jagged, messy, pointed join? It looks like a little explosion took place instead of a nice melty spot. Good question. Right there, that tells me there's too much energy. All right, so you just need to dial it down a little bit. A perfect weld, and you can get them every time. Once you get used to your machine and the settings, you will get them perfect every time. And you're gonna touch that, and it's just gonna go whoosh, and it's gonna be perfectly joined. You're gonna have this nice little casing all around the joint that's just flawless. Okay, if I get pits, I have too much energy. If I blow apart and I get balls, either on one side or both sides, it's too much energy. Now, here's another question that goes along with that. Sometimes they get one ball, okay? So can I take this and still use this jump ring if I still have a flat edge and I have a ball on this end? Absolutely you can. Matter of fact, I find that I get almost the perfect weld when I have two balls and I put them back together again, and then I hit it one more time with my welder and I don't change it. That was too much energy, right? But now I've got more metal here and here, and when I pull it back, even though it's too much energy for just a nice, beautiful one, when I have the two balls and I hit it again with that same energy, it just beautifully smooths out. Something similar is going to happen when you have this ball with a flat end. Okay, you're gonna have not as high rate of a success if you have a flat end and a bald end, but give it a try and see what you think. But it is possible to continue to use these even though you've got two balled up ends or a flat and a ball. Can you weld the same spot over and over? Yes, you can. And I do it all the time, because sometimes my weld did not penetrate deep enough. Sometimes I got a little explosion and I just need to come back in and smooth things out. Sometimes I need to add some filler wire. Yes, you can. Again, you just need to spend some time with your welder to really get to know it. Grab everything you can and just try welding it and see what happens. All right, let's talk a little bit about our electrodes. Can you discuss the blunting of the electrode with sterling silver? So, sterling and copper are very heat conductive materials, and that is going to affect how I set everything, not only the energy, but also my electrode. When I'm working with heat conductive materials. That means here's my ring. If I heat or weld right here at the join on this, my heat is actually going to disperse all the way around the ring and the whole thing is going to heat up. So it is so important that you are not holding this with your fingers. Okay, but if I use something like gold or platinum or anything like that, it's not heat conductive. That means if I do my weld right here, the heat stays right here. I mean, you guys will notice if you work with 14 karat gold or 18 karat gold and sterling silver, oh my gosh, it's a dream because the heat just stays right there where that weld is. So you're not going to have as many problems with like 14 karat. Gold fill is a different option or a different thing altogether because again, that core is usually brass or copper or silver. But when I'm using sterling silver, I will blunt the end ever so little bit. So I'll sharpen it and then I'll go zzz, just like that. That's all I do. And I'm literally just that quick. And it just puts a very, very fine flat spot. What happens is it allows my energy to disperse a little bit more than it would if I were to leave it pointed. That pointed is great for gold, it's great for platinum, but when you're doing sterling, copper, brass, anything like that, those heat conductive materials, you want to blunt that end so that you can disperse that energy just a little bit better. All right, what about gold fill? Do I blunt that one? Yep, I do as well because again, that core is not gold and it is most likely a heat conductive material for the core. All right, can I sharpen both ends of my electrode? Yes, you can, but I will tell you right now, it is going to make it so you have to change your settings. When that energy comes down that electrode, if it's coming in off of a flat spot and traveling down to the point, you get that more concentrated energy that comes all the way down. But if I've got a point at this end and then it's got to come up and then back down, it's going to change how that energy flows through the electrode. Will it make a difference in permanent jewelry? I don't know, but I noticed that it does make a difference as I'm doing larger pieces. So my suggestion, and another commenter said as well, get all of your electrodes sharpened. It comes with 3 or 5 of them. Get them all sharpened. Buy some more. They're like $5. So it's a very, very minimal cost. Get multiples, get them all ready, and then you can just swap them out and then do a whole sharpening system when you're ready to sharpen a bunch of them. Is there a Dremel that you recommend for the discs? Now in my studio, because I've had my welder for about 7 years now, which is long before the little Pilot came out, I just bought a little handheld Dremel and I just put it in here. Now Dremels have a 1/8 inch mandrel on here, so it's going to work pretty much with any of them because the diamond disc that comes with your machine has a 1/8 inch mandrel on that. So you can just buy any Dremel and it should work just fine. The Pilot, you can get those from Sunstone Engineering and you can use the diamond disc in that as well. How many welds can you do before you have to clean that electrode? Well, that's $1 million question as well, isn't it? There is no good answer for that because it's going to depend on the amount of splatter you get, the amount of soot you get. Are you giving too much energy, not enough energy? Again, there's no real true answer to that. Now, how often do I sharpen? I sharpen it as many times as I need to, as soon as I see that it's getting dirty. You'll notice if you try to use a dirty electrode, your welds are going to be either messy, you're going to have to hit it multiple times in order to get the weld to happen, if you can get the weld to happen, or it's just not going to work, like I said. So if I notice that I'm having troubles or difficulties, I sharpen my electrode. Now let's go back to eye protection, okay? There is a big debate on people saying, oh, well, I can just blink, I'll close my eyes, you know, I don't need to do anything like that for the protection. The safest place that you can be without protection is 50 feet away from that weld. So if I'm 50 feet away, then I don't need the eye protection. Any closer than that, you really do need it. And I'm telling you guys, do not listen to these people who are telling you it's not a big deal. Don't even listen to them. I mean, at that point, they've lost their credibility with me because it is a huge deal. All right. I cannot stress this enough. And it bothers me to no end that are people telling you that it's no big deal. It's a huge deal. buy some glasses. You can get them on Amazon. You can get them from Sunstone. You can get them from Micro Tools. There's a number of places, and I'll throw some links down below in the description to some. Again, you guys are talking like $10 to $20. And that is so worth an investment for protecting your eyes. You don't want to wear this? Fine. Look through your phone. Have your customers look through your phone. Okay, so you have options. Do not select the option of I'll just close my eyes, or I'll look away, or I'll look at it. Okay, take some precautions and really protect your vision. Okay, if you're not seeing a spark, is it safe? I'm not going to say yes or no because I do not know, but for me, I'm going to wear my eye protection. Now, here's the problem with wearing the eye protection. It is hard to see your joint. Believe me, I get it, I know. And I have my best friend who also does permanent jewelry. She gave me one of the very best tips, a red Sharpie. If you take the red Sharpie, not black or anything else, but a red Sharpie, it actually almost glows, like you can see it so well. So she closes her ring, marks it with the red Sharpie, and then she can put her glasses on and she sees it and hits it on target perfectly every time. So thank you, Allison, for that great tip. What about eye protection that has magnification? That one, I'm still looking for a good set of glasses or lenses that has the magnification with the eye protection. But there are glasses that you can put over your regular glasses or cheaters or whatever to magnify, and you can do it that way. Not as much fun, but at least it's an option. All right, another person has said, I want to use this welder for more than just permanent jewelry. Can I do a webinar on that? Guess what? I have one already, and I have some trainings coming up. So if you guys are interested in learning more about welding with the welders that are not just permanent jewelry, but doing a lot of other things, make sure you get in touch with me because I do have some more trainings that will be coming up, both in person and online. And I will include the link to the webinar that I did about a year or so ago now, down in the description as well, to show you some of the things that I do with it. All right, so what is more popular with clients? 14 karat, gold fill, sterling, 18 karat. Well, again, that's going to depend entirely on your clientele. So in my clientele, I have everybody. All right, so I have some people who want 18 karat, I have some that want 14. Now, I have those that really like the look of 14 karat or 18 karat gold, but they can't afford it. And that is where gold fill comes in to fill that. Now, the majority, I would say hands down, is sterling silver. That's by far my most popular. It's also the most affordable. But for people who want to make that little bit of a jump, having 14 karat gold fill, at least 1 to 3 chains as an option, gives you kind of a nice little buffer. And then there'll be people who are like, nope, I want that more expensive one, and they'll make the leap to the full gold wire. All right, what are my thoughts about using the chain without a jump ring? In other words, I'm not going to add a jump ring to close the chain together. Some of the chains you can do that just beautifully and just fine. And if you can, by all means do that. You're going to have to find out what works best for you, the chain styles that you're offering, as well as the thicknesses and your skill level. Okay, so you'll have to, again, play with that, and it's a personal preference. Now, here's a good one. This will come up quite often. You're putting a permanent piece of jewelry on somebody. What if they go swimming? What if they're playing around in the hot tub? What if they're cleaning? Well, this is a piece of metal, and yes, it will be damaged, period. And so that is something that you need to put either in your disclosure, an FAQ, or whatever else. Chemicals affect metals. There's just no two ways around that. So you need to prepare people that there will probably be some changes to that chain, both in texture and look, if they're getting it into the swimming pool chemicals or cleaning chemicals, anything like that. Now, that's a related question, is how do we clean this if it's on somebody? Believe it or not, one of my favorite things is toothpaste. White toothpaste, none of the blue clear or like the blue gel stuff, just white toothpaste. And if I have it on myself, I'm just gonna rub it with a soft toothbrush and just clean it up that way. Now, that's another thing too, is that when you're wearing permanent jewelry like this, it's constantly rubbing on your skin, your clothes, and it's going to help kind of keep that clean anyway. That is not to say that that does that for people who turn the silver. Okay, some people turn their metal. They just do. Like I said, my daughter turns hers black just like that, and she'll actually eat through the solder seams when I make her rings. I cannot make her rings with a solder joint because she eats right through it, and it's just a part of her pH. And for people that are like that, there's just not much that you can do. But again, cleaning with that toothpaste, if they keep that regularly, that can help keep some of that oxidation down. But again, if it's their chemistry makeup, there's just not much you can do about that. And then maybe you would steer them towards a gold bracelet rather than a sterling bracelet. All right, I had a question about, can we fit a wrist underneath the ADL to be able to weld? Yes, absolutely, a wrist will fit under here very nicely. Can we weld without the ADL and having the stylus plugged into that? Yes, you can. This will come out. Just make certain that if you are doing something with this where you're holding it by hand, again, you have some kind of eye protection. Another way to say thank you for joining us, I will offer also $100 off a machine for those of you guys who have attended or watched this webinar replay. Again, I will include that link down below. It's good until April 30th. Now that is a lot of information. At the beginning of this video, I told you about the Permanent Jewelry Expo. That is happening May 30th through June 1st, 2023 at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. If you would like to join us, I have a $50 off coupon. I will link that down in the comments or in the description of the video. It is only good until April 30th. So if you would like to come and see this stuff in person, you've seen what I've been able to do. You've seen my demonstration. Come meet me in person. Come work with me. I will be teaching 3 different workshops. We have a lineup of some great instructors that are coming to this, and it will be a lot of fun. We'll have the tools on hand that you can try out. We've got suppliers who are going to have chain and tools for your welders. So come on down and see us. We would love it. Again, I will put that discount code down in the description, as well as links to the different products that we have talked about. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you guys in Las Vegas. And keep in touch with me. I've got a lot more trainings coming up, both for permanent jewelry as well as just general welding. We will see you guys later. Thanks for joining us. Bye.